What's going on, guys? It's Jay here. We're going to be continuing doing drywall today. I got about 80% of it up in the last video. And today we're going to be doing some patches for places that we left undone. We're going to be taping and we're going to be texturing. I decided to go with a level 5 drywall finish because I like the look of the smooth wall over the texture. So that's just a personal preference. It's going to take a lot longer to finish, but it'll be worth it. Let's go. Alright guys, welcome back to the renovation. I'm going to skip straight over the fact that my legs are super sunburned and focus on the drywall because that's more important right now. What we're doing is patching some places in the wall that we had initially intentionally left blank. We had to rewire some places for outdoor outlets, and to get those areas we needed to have the wall open. So we're going back and putting these panels in. This is the easiest scenario for patching drywall. The patches are large and they go from stud to stud, so you're not going to be running into an odd situation where you have to put a brace between two seams of drywall. Right here I'm sliding it into place and I'm going to use some flat nail bars to prop the piece up to close any gaps on the top of this panel to make it flush with the upper one. The pressure from these wedges is going to keep the panel in place so I can screw it a lot more easily, but it's also going to do a more important function, which is closing the gaps to make nice seam. If you're going to have a gap anywhere, it's best to have it at the bottom because you're likely going to cover it with a molding anyways. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw a few screws here on the top of the panel to hold it in place, and then I'm going to have to cut around an outlet box that is on this portion of the wall. Now I know where the outlet box is, and I'm going to use a rotozip to cut around it, but before I do, you don't want to put too much pressure on this new panel of drywall. You could either pull the screw faces through the paper, or you could actually crack the drywall since you're really kind of bowing it around the box at this point. It can be a little tricky to get really clean lines cutting around these boxes with a rotozip. Sometimes it just jumps around and you can't edge the box kind of like you want to. But if that happens, don't be worried. You can always come back with a little bit of mud and tape and fill in any gaps that you happen to create around the edge of the box. I'm not going to fess up to the number of patches I had to make around these cuts, but it was at least all of them. Once you do have the boxes cut out though, you can go ahead and pull the panel down all the way to the studs with the screws and make it nice and tight. With the patch in place, it's just time for a little bit of taping and mudding. You want to go over all your screw heads with a thin coat of mud and then do your seams exactly the same way. Now I'm going to go into a little bit more detail later on how I did this taping, but your goal is to have a seamless transition between your panels. If you're doing this on an existing wall, it might be a little bit more difficult to get the texture the same if you have a finished wall. Since our entire room is unfinished, there's no problems with this and we're going to be able to blend it in completely smoothly. If you think taping is difficult, just wait until you try it on a ceiling. It's like 3 times harder and you have to manage, moving a ladder or stools or a walkway whenever you're doing this. There are tools that help you do this on the ceiling, but those are like $1,500 to get those mud tapers. So we're doing it all by hand, the hard old-fashioned way. The biggest thing to remember when taping is to use a lot of mud on your seams. You don't want any bubbles to be under there and you don't want it to dry out too fast. Go ahead and put a lot of mud and you can scrape it all off once you put your tape down. That'll ensure it adheres properly, and when it dries, it's going to look fantastic. Once that first portion of mud dries from you putting in the tape, you can float. Using a 12-inch knife, go ahead and put extra mud over the seam and try to feather it out. Your primary focus is to smooth out the height differences between the wall panel and the seam that you just made with your tape. With that patch done and taped, we're moving on to another one that we have in the living room that's done almost exactly the same way. And this one I'm going to show you a little bit closer how you do this patch. After measuring the opening that I'm trying to cover, I just use the drywall square to draw a line and then score the front side of the paper on the drywall. You don't have to saw or really cut too hard through drywall because once you cut through that front paper, it'll snap in half. Most of the integrity is held in that paper holding tension on both sides of the drywall. Once it snaps, you can go ahead and lay it on its side and score the back side, getting yourself a nice clean edge. Now at this point, you can use a rasp to clean up any jagged parts you have, just to make sure that the butt joints of your drywall come out really clean. I didn't show it, but it's really just a cheese grater for drywall that you run along the edge. No big deal. Again, we're going to be using flat bars to help pry the bottom of this piece up and butt it up against the top portion. I'm paying more attention to the left side and top of this drywall than anywhere else, because as long as those seams come together nicely, then the bottom portion and the portion near the door aren't really something to worry about. So we're just going to throw in a few screws here on the top, and then once again I'm going to have another outlet box to cut out with the rotozip, as well as a light switch box. As you can see, I left the far side of the drywall unsecured while I used the rotozip around the switch box. The rotozip might get a little bit off track since the drywall is prone to moving, but just take your time, go slow, and remember you can patch anything if it doesn't cut out exactly right. Now that we can fully secure the piece of drywall, we can go ahead and start taping those seams and get it ready for the finished coat. Remember, use a lot of mud here. It'll dry out on you faster than you think. It's called drywall for a reason. It will absorb the moisture out of the mud before you can get the tape on and a good adherence. Once the tape is in place, come back on top of it with a little bit of extra mud just to get the front of the paper wet. This will help it dry more evenly and prevent it from wrinkling up and getting wafery, so to speak, as it dries. You don't want to go overboard, you're just trying to really get the front of the paper wet and then scrape the rest of it off so that it can dry a little bit more quickly. This is something that Jeff from Home Renovation showed me, and it worked extremely well. With all the seams taped and dried, we're going to start doing our level 5 finish. Now this is the part where it's actually challenging and it's going to take some time to get used to the feel of doing this finish. I mixed about half a gallon of water in my 5-gallon bucket of mud, and that made it about the right consistency where you can spread it easily without leaving too many lines or building it up too thick. You really just want a nice thin coat over every square inch of the wall. You can come back and fill in low spots later, and you're going to have to sand off ridges and tool marks that you leave on accident. This is a finish that anybody can obtain, but it's going to be a lot more messy if you're like me and are unexperienced. I liked loading the wall up by going up and down, but then doing my finishing strokes from left to right to give it a nice consistent look. What you don't want is all your tool marks going different directions. As I worked my way through each of the rooms, I got progressively better little by little, wall by wall, as I kind of figured out what it was supposed to feel like putting this mud on. Gauging the depth became a little bit more natural, and I left less tool marks. I still had a lot of sanding, but it wasn't that bad overall. If you're not partial to a level 5 finish, I would probably recommend renting a gun and just spraying on like an orange peel or a knockdown texture. It's easier and it's faster, so, save your time. So for this past week, we've spent a lot of time patching the places in the drywall, taping, and really finishing off our texture. That texture with level 5, I'm not gonna lie to you, it's frustrating. I've spent so much time applying mud and then sanding it, and then applying mud and sanding it off again because I can't get it right. And that's really just the learning curve that I'm running into. I've tried different mud consistencies, and I did find that really thinning down your mud a lot is easier. And don't be afraid to throw away mud, because it saves so much time to go ahead and use clean mud that you're not like recycling from the wall and getting all dried out. Another thing is, if you're going to be sanding, get down to 220 grit sandpaper. You don't want to see those sanding marks, and that's the point where they visually disappear. While it is frustrating to spend so much time on something like this drywall, I think it's worth it because I really wanted to learn how to do that level 5 texture. And I knew that going into it, this was going to be a huge learning curve. So it is attainable to anybody, any skill level, but you're gonna have to spend a lot more time until you get used to it. I'm no guru who can just whip out a floating knife and just get it all done. It's taking me time. There's really not that much more to say at this point. There's a lot of trial and error, and it's a huge learning curve, but we're getting done. So I'm gonna leave you with this. As always, if you're enjoying this renovation and you wanna follow it from start to finish, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. I look forward to reading your comments down below, and go ahead and like the video if you're so inclined, or not. You do you. Until next time, have a good day.